Well, welcome to this brief introduction to the next edition of the journal. And our starting point for this is that we've had a editorial team meeting, which we call a think tank. We have that once a year. And in that, we reflect on where we've been and where we might like to go. And so part of our reflection this time has been to recognize that there's a significant shift in the direction the journal is going to take. And some of that shift came out of our engagement with the story in Acts 16, the man from Macedonia, the vision that called them to engage in mission and to do it in a way that actually caused a degree of disruption and disorientation. The uncertainties were gone, and what actually transpired turned out to be very different from what they might have expected. So reflecting on that, we're aware that actually there is some kind of disorientation and disruption taking place in our context in the West. And some of that disruption and disorientation has to do with the arrival of those who are very, very different to us, setting a completely different context for the mission field and requiring of us that we listen in new ways, and maybe ways that we've not yet learned.
I think a part of that is even here in North America, there are many leaders, many of us who feel, and we're largely what we call Protestant Euro-tribal leaders, who feel disruption and are unclear about what to do about it. And that creates anxiety. But in the text, in the Acts 16, the disruption really is about how God leads us to the other. In that case, it was Lydia. And Lydia becomes the eruptive way the Spirit creates new imagination. And so just to underline what Martin was saying, a part of it for us as a journal is we don't want to simply be saying, here's some stories for you to engage in, but how do you, listening to this, become participants with us in listening? How do we learn from each other in the midst of this?
It's been intriguing to me in classes at Fuller Seminary, where I'll often use articles from the journal, that whether it's watching a video or reading one of the articles, and with the class gathered after they do that, because of the types of themes and topics that come up in the journal, they'll quickly connect back into their own neighborhoods. Often my classes are online and students are scattered all over the world. And as they'll reflect on, here was a apparent disruptive challenge, a church that didn't know what to do, but then they end up being able to see God fomenting something that they simply hadn't expected. And that triggers in the room stories of the same kind. So it's obvious that this isn't, Martin, simply something y'all are having in the UK, but this is normal life of the Spirit. That when we pay attention, there are opportunities, invitations, way beyond our planning, way beyond our professional expertise. There are opportunities on the ground if, in fact, we'll simply pay attention to the other, and in the hope that the Spirit of God is ahead of us in that. And so those stories that I find coming up in classrooms.
Part of the richness of our editorial team meeting, these are some of the faces that were at that meeting, was just simply the fact that we come from three nations, both sides of the Atlantic, and our contexts are actually quite different in some ways, and yet there are some themes that emerge for all of us in terms of how God is reshaping the context of mission for all of us in the West. We're in a completely new situation. The question is, what do we make of it, and how do we listen to it in ways that are creative?
Yeah, so my community is in a kind of very everything in Newham, and what I'm excited about with the journal is that we're kind of taking seriously our encounters with people who are very unlike ourselves. And in sociology, we call this participatory methodology. So we're kind of saying that not through having ever taking here is what's happening, last word, which is created through listening to people and that there's knowledge there that we can learn from. So that's what's exciting me. It's a very feminist approach as well, to say, let's listen before we start speaking. And before we have the last word, we never will last word of this.
And that's part of our invitation. So I don't know whether either Fiona or Sarah Jane would like to comment on what we're hoping to enter into with the journalists in this next period in terms of inviting you into a conversation. Would either of you like to comment on that?
We want to re-enter and engage some stories and listen to what God has been up to in those stories. And we are going to suggest and offer some simple actions for folks to take. And we do look forward to hearing from you and learning from you what's going on in your context and how you are discerning and discovering what God is up to. How are you being disrupted and surprised by the Spirit in your context? And yeah, we want to fill out and continue to hear from folks outside of our own relationship circles, so that our own listening is enriched, and we can all be encouraged and surprised and challenged by what God is up to amongst us. So you can look for that coming up in the next editions, and there'll be opportunities for conversation through webinar and other pieces as well. And these are really important for us. We don't do this to hear ourselves. There's lots of ways to write and have all kinds of affirmations and accolades for wonderful big thoughts, but we really do want to listen and engage. And so we look forward to the opportunity to hear what's going on in your context as well in the journal.